The civilizations they tried to erase. Hidden Histories of Alkebulan and the Americas by Rue. The civilizations they tried to erase. Before the modern world drew borders across maps, before textbooks simplified history into a handful of empires, before the word civilization was claimed by those who arrived last, this planet was already alive with knowledge. Across the great lands of Alkebulan, across the mountains and rivers of the Americas, across forests, deserts, coastlines, and valleys, entire civilizations flourished with their own science, philosophy, governance, architecture, and spiritual understanding. Cities rose from jungle floors and desert mesas. Roads crossed mountain ranges. Trade routes stretched across oceans and grasslands. Farmers studied the movement of stars to guide harvest seasons. Engineers moved rivers and carved mountains. Storytellers preserved history without ink. And communities governed themselves through councils long before modern governments claimed the invention of democracy. Yet somewhere along the march of empire, something happened. The story of the world was rewritten. The civilizations that built cities before Europe emerged from the Dark Ages were suddenly called primitive. The societies that mapped the stars and cultivated vast agricultural systems were suddenly described as uncivilized. Entire knowledge systems were pushed into silence, not because they lacked wisdom, but because acknowledging them would disrupt the narrative of those who arrived with conquest in their sails. This series is not about romanticizing the past, and it is not about replacing one myth with another. It is about remembering. Remembering the Yoruba philosophers of West Alkebulan, the engineers of the Nile Valley, the builders of Great Zimbabwe, the astronomers of the Maya, the city planners of Tenochtitlan, the mountain architects of the Inca, the mound builders of Cahokia, the desert farmers of the Pueblo, the navigators of the Pacific coast, the rainforest cultures who understood ecosystems modern science is still trying to decode. These were not isolated tribes wandering through history. These were civilizations. Complex, intelligent, organized, creative, and deeply connected to the lands that sustained them. To study them is not to reject the present world. It is to understand that the present world stands on foundations built by many peoples across many lands. The story of civilization was never owned by a single continent. It was always a global conversation. And what you are about to hear are the voices of civilizations they tried to erase. Civilizations of Alkebulan, modern-day Africa. Long before colonization carved borders across maps, before European ships redrew the geography of power, the great land known by many indigenous names, often remembered today as Alkebulan, the mother of humanity, was home to a vast constellation of civilizations. Across deserts, forests, river valleys, mountains, and savannas, societies rose with their own systems of governance, knowledge, agriculture, spirituality, and science. The Yoruba preserved sacred cosmology through the wisdom of Ifa. The Igbo governed themselves through councils and community consensus. The Hausa built trade cities across the Sahel. The Fulani moved across grasslands with pastoral knowledge refined over centuries. The Akan and Ashanti organized powerful kingdoms whose gold and philosophy influenced entire regions. The Awe and Ga built coastal societies shaped by trade and maritime culture. In the forests and plains of the continent, countless peoples built systems of knowledge long before the modern world imagined itself as the center of civilization. The Serer preserved ancient cosmology tied to land and ancestors. The Mandinka built the Mali Empire and the legendary intellectual centers of Timbuktu. The Bambara sustained agricultural societies rooted in harmony with the earth. In the eastern highlands rose civilizations like the Amhara and Tigrayan peoples, whose monumental architecture and kingdoms shaped the region for centuries. The Somali navigated ocean trade across the Horn. The Afar mastered life in the harsh desert frontier. Further south, powerful societies emerged, such as the Zulu, the Xhosa, the Shona builders of Great Zimbabwe, and the Tswana communities, whose governance councils valued open dialogue. The Sutu kingdoms rose within mountain strongholds, while the Ndebele transformed entire villages into living works of art through geometric architecture. The Venda preserved sacred landscapes, the Swazi built ceremonial kingdoms, and the Kikuyu maintained spiritual traditions centered around sacred mountains. Across the savannah, Maasai pastoral warriors guarded cattle culture tied deeply to identity and survival. The Luo lived beside Great Lakes. The Luba preserved history through memory boards. The Lunda built imperial networks across central lands, and the Kingdom of Congo developed complex statecraft along the Great River. In forests, deserts, and highlands lived cultures like the Baka and Mbuti, who mastered rainforest ecosystems. The San, whose rock art remains among humanity's oldest visual records, and the Oromo, whose rotating Gada system demonstrated sophisticated governance long before modern political systems claimed such ideas. This was not a continent waiting to be discovered. It was a continent of civilizations, farmers, engineers, astronomers, traders, philosophers, artists, navigators, and builders. A continent whose memory still lives in language, art, culture, and ancestral knowledge. To study these civilizations is not to romanticize the past. It is to remember that human knowledge has always been global, always diverse, and always shaped by countless cultures whose contributions built the foundations of the world we live in today. Indigenous civilizations of Turtle Island, America. Long before the arrival of colonizing empires, before maps were renamed and histories rewritten, the lands now called the Americas were home to countless indigenous civilizations whose knowledge shaped entire continents. Across jungles, mountains, plains, rivers, deserts, and coastlines, societies developed complex systems of governance, agriculture, science, and spirituality. In the forests of Mesoamerica, the Maya civilization built great cities rising above the jungle canopy. Their astronomers tracked the movement of planets with extraordinary precision. Their mathematicians developed advanced number systems, and their glyph writing preserved centuries of history carved into stone monuments. In central Mexico, the Mexica, often called the Aztecs, built the island city of Tenochtitlan, a metropolis rising from the waters of Lake Texcoco, connected by canals, bridges, and floating gardens that fed a vast population. Far to the south, in the Andes Mountains, the Inca civilization constructed an empire stretching across thousands of miles of rugged terrain. Roads crossed mountain ridges, suspension bridges spanned deep valleys, and cities such as Machu Picchu demonstrated engineering mastery still admired today. Earlier cultures, such as the Olmec, laid foundations for many Mesoamerican traditions, carving colossal stone heads that still stand as witnesses to ancient leadership and artistic skill. Across the Caribbean islands flourished the Taino and Arawak peoples, navigators of turquoise seas who built villages, cultivated cassava, and honored spiritual forces through ceremonial carvings. In North America, mound builders of the Mississippian civilization constructed massive earth pyramids at cities like Cahokia, where thousands of people gathered in urban communities centuries before European colonization. In the desert Southwest, the Hopi, Pueblo, and ancestral Pueblo peoples built villages atop mesas and within canyon cliffs, mastering agriculture in dry environments and maintaining sacred ceremonial traditions that continue today. The Dene, often called Navajo, shaped cultural identity around 4 sacred mountains, weaving textiles and building homes aligned with the rising sun. Across the Great Plains, the Lakota followed vast bison herds, developing mobile societies connected to the rhythms of the land and the spiritual relationship between humans and nature. In the forests and mountains of South America lived powerful civilizations such as the Tiwanaku, the Wari, and the Chimu, who engineered irrigation systems, built monumental cities like Chanshan, and developed complex artistic traditions in metal and stone. The Muisca of the Colombian highlands created confederations known for gold craftsmanship that later inspired the legend of El Dorado. In the Amazon and forest regions lived societies such as the Tupi and Guarani, whose knowledge of rivers, plants, and rainforest ecosystems allowed entire communities to thrive within the vast jungle. Along the northern Pacific coast, the Haida, Tlingit, and Salish carved towering totem poles, built ocean-going cedar canoes, and developed vibrant artistic traditions tied to clan identity and coastal life. Each of these civilizations possessed its own systems of knowledge, its own relationship with land and water, its own cultural memory passed through stories, ceremonies, architecture, and art. These were not empty lands waiting to be discovered. They were lands already filled with history, knowledge, science, philosophy, governance, and community. To remember these civilizations is to restore a truth often buried beneath colonial narratives, that human civilization has always been many civilizations, each contributing to the shared story of humanity. Closing message. One human story. When you step back and look across the full sweep of human history, something remarkable begins to appear. From the river valleys of Alkebulan to the mountains of the Andes, from the forests of the Amazon to the deserts of the American Southwest, human societies have always been doing the same essential thing: learning how to live. Learning how to grow food from difficult landscapes, how to organize communities, how to tell stories that preserve memory, how to build structures that outlive generations, how to ask questions about the stars above and the life within. The Yoruba, the Akan, the Shona, the Congo, the Oromo, the Maya, the Mexica, the Inca, the Haudenosaunee, the Hopi, the Lakota. Each civilization developed its own language for understanding the world. Different symbols, different stories, different rituals, but the same underlying search for balance between humanity, nature, and the unknown forces that shape existence. And when you place these civilizations side by side, something becomes very clear. Humanity has never been empty of wisdom. The knowledge of this planet has always been shared across many cultures, many lands, many perspectives. The tragedy of colonization was not only the loss of land or political power, it was the disruption of memory. Entire libraries of knowledge once carried through language, ceremony, architecture, and community were dismissed or ignored. Yet even through conquest and centuries of erasure, these civilizations never truly disappeared. They survived in language, in music, in art, in the stories elders still tell, in the ways communities still plant crops, build homes, govern themselves, and teach their children who they are. To remember these civilizations is not about living in the past. It is about restoring balance to our understanding of the present. Because the truth is simple and powerful. Civilization was never owned by one culture. It has always been the shared creation of humanity. And when we allow ourselves to see the full story, when we recognize the wisdom carried by many peoples across many lands, we begin to see something larger than any empire ever claimed. We begin to see the true inheritance of humanity itself. Ashe.